Stringfellow Hawke.
It's a series about a super advanced helicopter that is unlike any other. It's used for military missions or just helping people, helping people in need. Just so long as that help requires a super advanced attack helicopter blowing up another vehicle.
Let's go get the lady.
Airwolf.
And don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of all this.
Airwolf was a 1980s action series shown initially by CBS that followed the adventures of the eponymous attack helicopter called Airwolf.
What's all this got to do with Stringfellow Hawke?
Originally created by the CIA sub-agency The Firm, Airwolf is a super advanced helicopter complete with state-of-the-art computers, scanners, and has enough firepower to level a small town, should that be your bag, and is able to travel at supersonic speeds. And this is very important, it is not, repeat, not, to be used to earn a little extra cash on the side to deliver pizza. Seriously, the tips won't cover the fuel bills and you can never get rid of the smell.
Those B-52s are about to let go.
That's just what I'm counting on.
You could say Airwolf was just a little bit inspired by Knight Rider or the movie Blue Thunder, and there's a little bit of the DNA of both in Airwolf, but the series does manage to be its own thing for the most part. And there's also a schism, for reasons we'll go into later, because there's a sort of Airwolf, not Airwolf, but Airwolf thing happening for the final season.
Uh-oh, look at this.
Yeah.
Which was almost but not quite an entirely different series, officially Airwolf, but okay, we'll come back to that later.
Yeah, you don't like the plan.
I think it stinks.
Get a better one?
You bet. Let's not go at all.
Stringfellow Hawke is a pilot, a hermit, and a Vietnam vet who lives out in his cabin on a remote lake where he often plays his cello on a jetty. He has a massive art collection, much of which consists of genuine masters that are also apparently officially hanging in major galleries around the world. He works as a pilot for his friend Dominic Santini's company, providing helicopter services for various industries, though often for motion pictures. Dominic Santini had been friends with Hawke's father and had taught Hawke and his brother to fly. Hawke and Santini are a close team and inseparable.
That's right.
Airwolf began with a 90-minute movie, first broadcast in January of 1984. The Hawke we meet in the pilot movie is about 200 times more intense than we meet in the series. He's a man on the edge who's haunted, very grouchy, can be quite unpleasant, which, having grown up with Stringfellow as your first name, is not entirely unsurprising.
When he was 12, he and his parents were in a boating accident on the lake. They drowned. Just before he shipped out to Vietnam, he and his girlfriend were in a car crash. She died.
Hawke is also driven by the need to know what happened to his brother, Sinjin, who was left behind in Vietnam.
In Nam, he and his brother went down on the same mission. He got picked up. Sinjin didn't.
Was he dead or was he still alive as a prisoner of war? Michael Colesmith Briggs III was a high-up at the Firm, an offshoot of the CIA. His organization had bankrolled the development of an advanced helicopter designed by Charles Moffat, a genius, but a genius who's also a psychotic asshole, a bit like my former mentor, David Psychotic Arsehole, author of books such as Watch Out, I'm an Asshole. Moffat was meant to be showing off Airwolf to Private Detective Luther Gillis. What do you mean he's an actor? And Moffat decides instead he's just going to kill everyone and make off with Airwolf. Colesmith Briggs, also known as Arkangel, survives his injuries but cannot let Moffat give Airwolf to Libya and insists former Airwolf test pilot Stringfellow Hawke recover the killer copter. Hawke, for his part, isn't interested, even when Arkangel's assistant Gabrielle gets close to Hawke. Through a combination of guilt and extortion, Arkangel does get Hawke to agree to take on the mission, but Hawke has to bring Dominic Santini as co-pilot. It certainly would have been an interesting twist if it was revealed that Santini couldn't actually fly, but Hawke just wanted him along since Santini's infectious laughter cheered him up no end.
Well, the next morning, that officer's...
Gabrielle is murdered by the sadistic Moffat, and Hawke uses his anger to do what he does in most Airwolf episodes. He just blows up the villain. Mission accomplished, right? Well, not quite.
Hawke has promised to return Airwolf only if we can find his brother Sinjin, an MIA in Vietnam.
The Firm can help you.
In exchange for using Airwolf on official business.
And so, Airwolf the series would feature many missions involving spy missions, or ones with a Cold War backdrop. Military battle scenes would feature extensively, and indeed would be way beyond what most television series at the time would depict. Airwolf wouldn't just be about Airwolf blowing other aircraft out of the sky. Well, not always. But there would often be plots that had nothing to do with the Cold War or espionage. Organised crime would pop up quite a bit, where Santini Air intersected with some gangster schemes, and it was up to Hawke and Dom with Arkangel and Kate to deal with it. Which, of course, ended with Airwolf showing up
After 20 years, I want to savor this moment.
and blowing up the villains. I mean, that sure is one novel way of interpreting Miranda rights. The show did start off with the villains surrendering some of the time, but by the end of season 3, with a few exceptions here and there, this was how the writers ended most episodes. Airwolf is stored in the Lair, a cave apparently somewhere in the Valley of the Gods in Utah. Stringfellow and Dom would often refer to Airwolf as the lady, particularly around other people.
I think we better take the lady for a look-see.
Stringfellow Hawke of the series was a little more mellow. Hawke was occasionally shown to have a deadpan sense of humour, though it is hard to tell, as Jan-Michael Vincent tends to play him deadpan pretty much all of the time. By the third season, he plays Hawke as if his jaw was almost wired shut, sneering out of a corner of his mouth.
You don't have any idea where St. John is, do you?
In an era where the lead of these action shows was generally portrayed as a happy-go-lucky type, Hawke is still allowed to be a borderline grouch, who even when he smiles seems angry. Through the sneering, Hawke does have a very big heart.
We'll work something out.
He would hang out at his pad on the lake less and less, and the cello seems to have gone AWOL, assuming of course a stringed instrument needs an authorization to be shoved in the back of a cupboard. Vincent does make Hawke into a reasonably unique creation for a network show.
Oh, come on. That's nothing.
He does fall in love on occasion, occasionally meets former girlfriends.
Hello, String.
But he's also obsessed with finding out the fate of his brother. Part of Hawke's deal with Arkangel is that the firm will use its resources to find out where St. John is, if he's alive, and where he might be being held.
St. John?
Throughout early seasons, Hawke will meet someone who may have information about his long-lost brother, but invariably they are often involved with some plot.
I know where St. John is!
Or are lying, or are conveniently killed before they can offer up any useful information.
Just watched him fly right into a mountain.
The cast of Airwolf work really well with characters that could easily come off as thin, cardboard characters with lesser actors.
What do you mean almost perfect?
Well, 100% would be perfect.
It's still an 80s action-adventure series with a veneer of cheese.
You and your pals! Throw a little...
But at the very least, it's much thicker cardboard than some of the other shows of the day. Hawke does mellow quite a bit, but he always feels like a very tightly coiled spring, ready to jump into action. There are times where Hawke's facade of toughness is punctured, and Vincent is great in those scenes.
I truly like you, Angelica.
Now, that's what they call acting, dear boy.
Jan-Michael Vincent had been acting for many years and could learn a script almost immediately, but his personal demons would get him into trouble. He had issues with hard drinking and substance abuse offset, which, apart from various arrests and restraining orders issued against him, would also garner him a reputation within the industry for being difficult to work with. We're not going to delve into Vincent's personal issues in this video, but suffice it to say, whoa. Either way, Airwolf would be his career high.
How about 50 feet, give or take a few?
It ain't the 50 feet I'm worried about, it's the give or take.
Ernest Borgnine was for years one of the few people in Hollywood who could move between roles in feature films and television, at a time when crossing the streams was a no-no.
Mamma mia, I forgot. We got a gig at the studio tomorrow.
He'd already won an Academy Award for Best Actor in the 1955 film Marty, and starred in the television comedy McHale's Navy. He also popped up in movies like Ice Station Zebra, Poseidon Adventure, The Black Hole, and so appearing in Airwolf was no big deal for Borgnine. I mean, it was no future cop, but then what is?
Oh, mamma mia.
Santini tries to keep his business afloat while also having to work around missions for the firm. Quite often, Hawke and Santini will become involved in trying to help someone, with the firm occasionally helping out. Santini is a mostly jolly character to have around, apart from where his daughter and ex-wife died, but aside from that, he's mostly a barrel of laughs. Just don't mention the dead daughter and ex-wife. He's also usually a lot more cautious than Hawke, often being the voice of reason.
And I believe in staying alive, String. So don't even think what I know you're thinking of.
spy agency boss Arkangel was partially blinded in the pilot and would become Airwolf's unofficial handler on any of the firm's dealings with Hawke.
He's a man who knows the location of Airwolf, and when he starts junketing off to the land of rum and fine cigars, I get a little concerned about him.
His agency would try and oust him on occasion, but Arkangel would survive. He would occasionally accompany Hawke on missions, but he was generally not somebody who would get his hands dirty. I mean, would you with that suit?
Isn't that a bit ridiculous? You're not going to shoot me.
Ow! You shot me!
The playfully adversarial banter between Hawke and Arkangel would be toned down quite a bit, and by the third season, Briggs is mostly referred to by his real name, rather than the handle he uses in Call of Duty.
I deal in facts and logic. What kind of bug you got in your pants anyway?
Arkangel was a useful person when you needed the resources of the firm, especially for finding out information in pre-Google days. But he is also probably the last person you'd want to cast as William Tell. Alex Cord was one of those people who guest starred in many series from the 60s onwards, and at one point starred in the pilot for a potential Gene Roddenberry science fiction series, Genesis 2. Arkangel is often accompanied by glamorous assistants, also clad in white. In the first 2 seasons, this was often the sardonic Marella, played by Deborah Pratt, who was also married to Don Bellisario at the time.
I have 5 doctors.
But you're not a doctor.
If you mean a medical doctor?
Huh.
No, I still have a year of school left.
Deborah Pratt was an actress on many series, but would later be a writer and voiceover artist on Quantum Leap, where she was Ziggy the computer and the narrator who introduced the series. The first season of Airwolf debuted mid-season in early 1984. Most episodes revolve around Airwolf going on some missions with a Cold War backdrop, or there's some revolutionaries in a smaller country. Airwolf goes toe-to-toe with various aircraft, with Stringfellow Hawke and Santini often having to work with eyes in the back of their head to see how the firm or someone else will try and take Airwolf from them. It's also a smattering of high-tech crime caper. The relationships between Hawke and Santini on the one side and Arkangel is still a little strained. Hawke feels he can trust Arkangel only so far as he could throw him, whereas if Arkangel could physically throw Hawke, he'd probably arc to one side.
Right.
We spend a lot more time at the lake than we would in later seasons as Groucho Hawke settles down into someone a little less internalized. Airwolf was criticised for its violence, and the show's Nielsen ratings were never great relative to its cost as a series. The show never cracked the top 30 programs of any year that it was on air. All those battle sequences were very expensive for a show that really needed to rate better for the US network to continue to screen it.
She sure gets your heart to pumping, huh?
Sure does.
For the show's second season, Jean Bruce Scott became a regular, with her character Caitlin O'Shaughnessy
I'm Deputy Caitlin O'Shaughnessy.
introduced as a police pilot from Texas.
You try anything, Catboy. I'm gonna make what he did to you look like love taps.
The out-and-out military combat storylines were toned down significantly as the season progressed, with the Airwolf team usually taking on smaller adversaries.
Mamma mia.
Caitlin was a Texas police pilot who gives up her job and appears at Santini Air looking for work.
Do you mean that you're gonna sit there and tell me that I just imagined, well, that I didn't see? That there's no big black helicopter? Now, can you do that?
Dom reluctantly hires her on a casual basis for Santini Air before finally being trained as a backup pilot for Airwolf.
Ooh-wee. Well, they're helicopters, but they're more like gunships. These guys are armed to the teeth.
Jean Bruce Scott would do many guest starring roles on television at the time. Before Airwolf, she was a semi-regular on Magnum PI and St. Elsewhere. Her character's thick Texan accent in early appearances was toned down after a few episodes, so perhaps she lost her accent in between episodes in a barbecuing accident.
And make sure you get back in one piece, in case they need a second take.
Very funny.
Kate is energetic and bubbly, not a pushover, and for a time seems quite sweet on Hawke. But this was the 1980s, and a relationship between two lead characters, like Airwolf Season 5, wasn't going to fly. Caitlin at one point seems to pursue acting as a side hustle. Look, I once pursued acting as a side hustle, where I made a lucrative living in commercials as before in ads for shingles medication. I have to date never had shingles, but if you've got the look, what are you gonna do?
Mamma mia.
There was a minor trend in adventure programming in the early 80s about man and advanced machinery, and it's usually super advanced machinery. Clint Eastwood's Firefox had a super fighter jet.
One man really can make a difference.
Knight Rider debuted in 1982. It was about a man with a talking supercar who fought crime while working for a semi-official organization.
Don't tell me this thing flies.
No.
Blue Thunder was a 1983 movie about an edgy Vietnam vet turned police pilot testing a super advanced helicopter and then making off with it after uncovering a conspiracy. Airwolf was about an edgy Vietnam vet, Stringfellow Hawke, who comes into possession of an advanced helicopter, uses it to go on missions for the firm, who are unofficially paying the bills. The other half of the series sees Hawke and his buddy Dominic helping out people who are in trouble, usually with gangsters, crooked local authorities and the like.
Now, what'll we talk about?
Airwolf debuted in early 1984, a few weeks after another series featuring an advanced helicopter based on the film Blue Thunder. However, perhaps mercifully, Blue Thunder the series did not last very long.
Sounds like a bad TV movie to me, too.
Writer and producer Donald P Bellisario had already worked on Bar Black Sheep and Battlestar Galactica. He set up Magnum PI and sold the short-lived Tales of the Gold Monkey series, and would later create Quantum Leap, JAG and its spin-off NCIS. As an aviation enthusiast, many of Bellisario's series featured a pilot or former pilots as main characters. He'd had an idea for an action-adventure series starring, guess what, a pilot, and sort of set up something in an episode of Magnum PI, but when that wasn't picked up, he tweaked the idea until he ended up with the basic premise of Airwolf.
I know helicopters, gentlemen.
As the military missions became less and less prominent, Airwolf in its second and third seasons would settle into a rhythm where sometimes they were on firm business, but other times they'd just find trouble on their own. So there are a number of episodes where you could say the show was Knight Rider with a helicopter. And indeed, Airwolf is often overkill for the adversaries featured in many episodes. But not having Airwolf appear wasn't an option. So the episode's villain would usually try to escape in another vehicle, usually a chopper, and just to provide some challenge, often a heavily armed chopper. But once the Airwolf theme starts up towards the end of an episode, the villains are utterly fucked. Airwolf is an attack chopper and it can't really force down another aircraft. And so, after a warning from Hawke,
Don't make me take you down. You couldn't do it on your best.
Airwolf will just usually destroy the villains, just as the theme tune reaches its crescendo. Airwolf is judge, jury, and executioner. Arkangel and the firm would appear more sporadically in the second and third seasons, just as Uncle Reg's scheduled meetings with his parole officer would happen more sporadically. As the spy military missions happened less and less, there was obviously less call on the spy agencies other than using Arkangel as a search engine. In the third season, Caitlin becomes more of a minor character. Towards the end of the show, Santini appears less and less, in what was becoming the Jan-Michael Vincent show. Hawke met Lee, a child in foster care who may or may not have been St. John's son. As the third season ended, Lee Van Hawke would be adopted by Stringfellow in the closing minutes of the season finale.
Maybe you'd think about coming living with me. Make you part of the family.
And like so many of the characters and situations of the first three seasons, is never mentioned again. Airwolf would be a show where it does seem like every single person they met was able to fly a helicopter. The only other way I know to get so many helicopter pilots in one spot would be to spray paint a giant H on the roof of a brothel.
I can fly.
Airwolf was armed to the teeth with machine guns and missiles of various types, though in the end they'd end up as animated cartoon missiles. The lady also had defensive countermeasures and an array of advanced scanners and computers. None of your graphics cribbed from a Sid Meier game on a Commodore 64, though for some reason Universal's sound editors really loved using sound effects from Centipede. Airwolf was also fast, I mean damn fast. In the real world, the fastest helicopter's top speed is usually between 200 and 300 miles an hour, or up to 560-ish kilometers per hour for the helicopter-airplane hybrid Osprey. In the series, Airwolf is shown to be travelling up to Mach 2, or twice the speed of sound, which is about 1500 miles per hour. It's bullshit, of course, but it's entertaining bullshit. Unless, of course, you're a helicopter instructor fielding 100 phone calls a day about Airwolf. The prop used in the series was based on a Bell 222 with extra bits added to make it look cooler and meaner. The close-ups of the weapons appearing and firing were separate props just used for the close-ups. Airwolf is mean. The only way it could be meaner is, well look, if you type Airwolf too often and too fast, sometimes you can come up with some weirdness.
right.
Donald P Bellisario would walk away from the show after the show's second season, tired of the various behind-the-scenes battles. Deborah Pratt also left at that time. The show's third season was overseen by Bernard Kowalski, who, unusually for a show-running executive producer, was more often a director than a writer or producer. Season 3 did feature a more formulaic but still entertaining premise of Knight Rider, but with an aerial execution at the end.
But I gotta admit, it was pretty slick. Pretty slick.
Well, thank you.
Airwolf's aerial action scenes are fantastic, thrilling, and exciting in a way few other series could match. Look, car chases are cool and all, but there's only so much mileage to be gleaned from jumping over a truck. Aerial chases between aircraft and battles between Airwolf and other well-armed helicopters and aeroplanes was one of the series' highlights. Even so, it wasn't all plain sailing with a stuntman killed during the filming of an aerial stunt. There's more than a little reuse of footage in the series, with some liberal use of stock footage from Universal's film library, but in its first 3 seasons, Airwolf doesn't make you feel too shortchanged. The show does convey some epic battles. In earlier years, they face off against various guerrilla armies, dictatorships, or hired goons with Uzis, and with the use of stock footage, MiG jets. Even when Airwolf came up against another heavily armed aircraft, chances are it was nothing compared to Airwolf, which could likely outrun any competition outside of the latest fighter jets. There are also more standard action set pieces, shootouts, fistfights, chases, and the like, making Airwolf one of the ultimate escapist action series of the decade. After the show's third season wrapped, the series was cancelled by CBS.
Now let it go, kid. She's gone.
But that was not the end of Airwolf, unfortunately.
That was affirmative on changeover.
The studio, Universal, financed a 4th season of 24 episodes so that there would be a decent number of episodes to sell into syndication. This last season would be shown on Universal's basic cable channel, USA Network, and as such, the budget would be cut right back. The final batch of episodes would be filmed in Canada with new co-production partners Atlantis and a new, cheaper cast who, possibly in rumours spread by me, would be paid in a choice of the local pre-decimal currency or Canadian Tire gift cards.
I don't know you people.
It's unclear if this 4th season was always a one and done to reach a syndication threshold or whether there was any chance of continuing. But it didn't, and we should probably be thankful for that.
That still does not give them the authorization to invade Soviet airspace.
The first episode of the season, Blackjack, sets up the new paradigm. St. John Hawke is alive, but through some pretty poorly thought out plotting was a prisoner, then returned home and then joined some covert operations and he was prisoner again. Kept captive by the guy who was meant to have rescued him. What? It just makes about as much sense as Auntie Beryl's dashcam footage from the low-hanging bridge incident. Jan-Michael Vincent appears for parts of the episode. Dom is seen from behind, where he's clearly a random old man the producers roped in to double for Ernest Borgnine in long shots. And then he's blown up, killing Dom and seriously injuring Hawke. Dominic's niece Jo Santini has witnessed all of that and is questioned by Locke, who's now replaced Arkangel at the firm, who've of course been replaced by the company.
Top secret data file requested. Enter access code.
And then there's Major Mike Rivers, who's a quirky co-pilot who manages to find the lair with about as much difficulty as a rooster has in aggravating a farmer's hangover. Locke and Rivers look for the lair, which seems to be somewhere that is cold and lined with trees in one shot, and then when you see stock footage of Airwolf, it's somewhere in the desert in the sun. Having found the lair, they find that someone else has gotten there first. Joe, Locke and Rivers team up to unofficially go after St. John Hawke. The trio take Airwolf, rescue St. John. St. John, who was Hawke's older brother, reunites with his brother who was, let's be charitable, really overcome with emotion. Stringfellow Hawke is then bundled off somewhere quietly by his brother, leaving St. John, Joe, Locke and Rivers to declare that they will continue Airwolf's work, whatever the hell that is.
I'd like to continue what we started.
But we need you, St. John, to complete the team.
Working for the company, but not controlled by them. The last season isn't well loved, with the consensus being that it's not very good at all. However, I'm constantly surprised at what does have fans, so it's entirely possible that there are folks who prefer this version of Airwolf, or Airwolf Light, or Son of Airwolf, or because it's made in Canada, A-Wolf. I mean, it's possible, just don't make eye contact and you'll be okay.
There's no big deal, guys. My leg hurts here. Hello? Bobby!
The The show's plots returned to more military and Cold War-based storylines, and pretty much any decent aerial footage of Airwolf in action was reused from the first 3 seasons. The production still had access to the static prop, and there were occasionally some very poor attempts at using models or video effects whenever they needed a specific shot of Airwolf. I also can't be sure if shots like this weren't always this terrible, or this was down to the remastering having limits.
There's something missing.
I guess that is par for the course. When you've got main characters so uninteresting that you'd be hard-pressed to look up from your G.I. Joe comic while this version of the show was airing.
Trust me.
St. John Hawke, played by other actors initially, was now played by Barry Van Dyke, since those Galactica 1980 residuals would only stretch so far. The rest of the cast were people working in Canada. Anthony Sherwood as Jason Locke, future Alienation star Michelle Scarabelli as Joe Santini, and eventual Forever Night star Geraint Wyn Davies as Mike Rivers, the company cut-up. The introductory episode was about as cack-handed as somebody who's realised far too late that there is no toilet paper. As for the rest of the season, it's as by the numbers as you can get. St. John is a personality vacuum, Joe is okay, Jason Locke speaks rather slowly and deliberately, and Mike throws out jokes every time the camera is on him, but the actor Davies seems really embarrassed.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
It's from the company?
Yeah, right. It's cheap.
However, if you take away the less than amazing scripts or the fact that every reason you had for watching a program called Airwolf is gone and the budget was something like a third of the first 3 seasons, apart from all of that, it's still not very good. It still looks quite decent. They've managed to retain a sense of scale. Okay, so it's scale in service of plots that are absolutely rubbish, but what are you going to do? As a late 80s action series, it's not terrible. As Airwolf, it's terrible. I was conflicted about covering this as a separate video. IMDb certainly counts the first 3 seasons and season 4 as separate shows. But boy, is season 4 hard to get through. It never resolves into anything interesting, and the regulars don't seem to have a lot of chemistry with each other.
Well, that's the end of Malduk.
I've seen occasional comments here and there from people who just want things the way they were, with no complications in storylines or plots made for 9-year-olds with no darkness or weakness or vulnerabilities in the main characters, by which they really only mean the male lead.
Superman. We got you cold, Curtis.
And absolutely no depth, just really simplistic stuff.
Mike's alive.
Well, dear viewer, if that's all you want from your entertainment, then Airwolf Season 4 is made for you.
He didn't get to go at all. He had to go to Afghanistan. I missed the whole damn thing. I am really disappointed.
I only come in once a week, but it was my idea.
At the end of the 4th season in 1987, Airwolf was done.
Considering what we put her through, we're lucky she's still around.
Airwolf, of course, has the iconic theme tune by Sylvester Levay, a composer and arranger in various styles, but his theme tune for the series would likely be his most memorable achievement for viewers of this channel. From the 2nd season onwards, the show score would almost entirely be generated on synthesizers, with Airwolf being one of the few shows with a synth score that utilised the sonic potential of the instruments. Either that or 80s nostalgia has hung around for so long that the decade's music has already gone through its wilderness period and is now perennially cool. The incidental music also works really well, but man, the theme tune. There was one time I had to pop into my office on a Saturday and I found a colleague blaring the Airwolf theme from their computer speakers as they conducted it. Champion.
I compliment you. Your mastery of silence is exceeded only by your facility at understatement.
The pilot episode was later edited into 2 one-hour episodes for repeat screenings, but there's also a version that was released on home video, which was the only exposure I had to Airwolf back in the 80s. There are some differences, some scenes cut, alternate versions, and even some choice language, which would have been a big no-no on network television. But the televised version of the pilot does tell the story better. Airwolf, like any television series that runs for more than a few weeks, had a lot of famous guest stars. Anybody associated with Bellisario's other shows, particularly Magnum, would usually appear, often more than once. Where of course Lance Legault shows up again and again. So lots of familiar character actors and stars who would show up in every show. Bryan Cranston is always the one that never fails to amuse. And here he appears with actress Robin Dearden. The pair actually met on the Airwolf set and later married. That is the fun of watching shows like this, when you see someone you know from something else showing up in an episode of a series like Airwolf. Him, and her several times, and him, and her, and him. All of them. Him not so much, but him, and her, and him, and her, and him. course, once production moved to Canada, there's still some American guest stars, but then there's all these people that you'll recognise from other shows made in Canada.
Shoot, kid, shoot.
Give me the gun, Bobby.
You're no Coronado.
Airwolf could be quite brutal, killing people, sometimes really innocent people out of nowhere. It's certainly a series with some bite in that regard. Stringfellow and Dom are shown to attend a lot of funerals of friends and former colleagues, but we never see them at any FAA proceedings regarding a spate of fatal aerial disasters where, quite coincidentally, the only witnesses are the crew of Airwolf. I'm not just talking about villains dying off, or victims in the first few minutes of an episode, but people dying off left, right and centre, sometimes people quite sympathetic, sometimes innocent people. Dom's daughter ODs and his ex is murdered, Half-Pint's foster mother is dropped from a chopper by emergency backup Magnum. Any woman that Stringfellow smiles at has a better than 50% chance of being disqualified from a return appearance, with the chances of death by foul play shooting up to 80% if there's any chance of nookie. As on other series about super advanced vehicles, choppers, cars, bikes and skateboards. What do you mean you've never seen Skater Gator? They would need to create a foe that would make Airwolf sweat. In Airwolf, it seems like every low-level villain has access to a warplane of some description or a civilian chopper with heavy armaments like machine guns or air-to-air missiles. I mean, sure, why not? They probably do them at Costco along with everything else. Airwolf would go up against the Red Wolf, or Airwolf 2. This replacement for Airwolf was of course purloined by a pilot who was intent on proving himself to be a better pilot than Stringfellow Hawke. It's nicknamed Red Wolf because of the colour job. It only appeared in the series once. Well, technically twice, when the footage was reused in the last season as a third super advanced chopper.
It's had two predecessors, but this one's supposed to be the ultimate machine.
There's also another heavily armoured chopper, the HX-1, which appears once. Again, twice because it's reused for another generic enemy chopper. They're all meant to be very closely matched, but it is Airwolf's name on the tin, so I'll let you guess which one prevails. It's the one in which Jan-Michael Vincent glares at the camera just before pulling the trigger.
St. John. St. John. It's British. It's a British name, St. John, St. John.
As for highs and lows for Airwolf, well, the lows are very easy. Let's just talk about the final season. There are 24 lows right there, more lows than a weekly weather forecast. When you binge the series, much of Airwolf does tend to blur into each other.
Well, if you're sure, yeah.
But I think the episode I most enjoyed was Condemned, where Hawke and Kate are exposed to a deadly biological weapon and have to work with a Soviet task force to see if an antidote was successfully developed. One episode involving an Airwolf simulator guest starred David Carradine as an easily manipulated scientist. Another time, Moffat's ghost came back to haunt them, not literally, but as part of a computerized booby trap left behind by the helicopter's Psycho Ball's creator.
Airwolf is a weapon too dangerous to be left in unenlightened hands. Finding Airwolf is your #1 priority. End of file.
A running theme of Airwolf is people wanting Airwolf. There are folks who are aware of Airwolf wanting to capture it for themselves, or people who suddenly become aware of it and then want it for themselves.
If you don't deliver Airwolf, I'll be killed.
First season episodes did feature a scene after the show's intro which recapped the show's format in the form of a briefing towards those tasked with reclaiming the helicopter. So once the series evolved and Airwolf was no longer facing off against armies and MiGs and becomes a fairly standard action-adventure series, there are many episodes where you're watching and you think to yourself, look, there's absolutely no way Airwolf is going to be required to resolve this plot. But in a show called Airwolf, you have to have Airwolf. I mean, this isn't Salvage 1.
I will personally send you straight to hell.
One of the leaps of logic required to watch the show would be to ignore how long it took to race out to the lair in Utah to retrieve Airwolf in the show's last act. Earlier episodes had Dom and Hawke driving out to the lair, and it was usually shown to be a long drive. Later on, Airwolf would show up with less notice than a short order cook has to make a short stack. Damn it, I want a short stack now. So they start out in Los Angeles, where many of the stories seem to be set. There's about 650 miles between Los Angeles and the lair, so an actual chopper capable of the upper limits of helicopter speed at a very rough guess would take, 2 hours at Mach 1, and would still take Airwolf close to an hour to get back, and well look, this was a 1-hour action show and not 3 episodes of 24. Also, without ignoring that issue, you wouldn't get great moments like this where Airwolf laid waste to a casino a few years before Godfather Part 3. As always, anytime I talk about mathematics, take it with a grain of salt, as I don't so much as have a head for numbers, more like 12 fingers. Either way, we didn't want realism. What we really wanted to see was Airwolf show up and blow up the baddie's chopper with the same explosion footage each week.
Stringfellow. Now, there's a weird name. There's a guy who got in fights in school.
Stringfellow?
So how is Airwolf? I did not watch it back in the day. I did rent the video version of the pilot, but for whatever reason, I don't remember watching very much of it. So my Airwolf recollections are more from watching it in full for the first time as an adult. I did like it, and preferred its first 2 seasons, since it didn't feel like a standard action-adventure series.
Hold it right there.
Even the 3rd season, Knight Rider with a chopper, was still fun and entertaining, apart from the rather obvious way the shows would almost always end.
Hey, Duck!
It's a fair bit darker in tone than Knight Rider or the A-Team. It has a sly sense of humour, but rarely goes fully comedic. It balances the cheese of 80s action series with a character dealing with real drama, where each episode just happens to end with an attack helicopter blowing up a villain's vehicle. The 4th season, well, it's more Airwolf, if you squint, but you could skip it and not miss anything. But I guess morbid curiosity could get the better of you, because that last season was a chore to sit through, like watching Australian tourists trying to understand tipping. As such, the first 3 seasons are highly recommended.
The big old teddy bear.
Yeah.
The classic cast are engaging and always great to watch, with Jan-Michael Vincent being so perfect for the tightly wound Stringfellow Hawke.
They think I still got it.
Somebody you should never, ever challenge to a staring contest.
Dead center, String, or we've got a nuclear disaster on our hands.
Airwolf, an 80s funfest that, for fans, burned very brightly for a short time before developing engine trouble and crash landing. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Could Airwolf survive at that range?